Hello and welcome to the Flipside. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Nichols. I want to thank you for once again joining me for a new episode, and I hope I've got some wonderful or at least entertaining things to throw at you today. Over this past week, sitting at a place having some coffee with my wife, I was introduced to a magazine called The Atlantic. Now, let me back up and say I've known that The Atlantic exists. I've never looked at it. It's not a magazine that I have ever perused. My wife enjoys this magazine. Okay. In that situation, I found myself without something to read. So I reached over and took this magazine because she was looking at something else. And I noticed an article right off the bat, right towards the front of the magazine, which was a opening argument, as they called it. Okay. I'll just put that up there. Okay. It says dispatches. And the name of this article was Why the COVID Deniers Won. Well, needless to say, I saw that title and was immediately intrigued. Part of my brain was also warning me, don't read this. Don't waste your time. Don't bother reading this because it's most likely just going to upset you because it's going to be a bunch of BS. The subtitle of this says Lessons from the Pandemic and Its Aftermath. This article is written by David Frum, F-R-U-M, David Frum. This guy is a staff writer for The Atlantic. The article revealed itself pretty quickly to be what it was, and it was exactly what I thought it was going to be, which is unfortunate. But it struck me. I was going to say it upset me, but that's giving it too much credit. But it struck me as once again another example of media, popular media, journalists, and I'm not sure how to categorize it. There's a particular set of people that still exist to this day that are COVID deniers. People who still think that folks like myself are quacks for speaking out against COVID, for ever saying anything that happened during COVID was wrong or bad, that we got it wrong. And it is dumbfounding to me that there are people that still think that way. Now, if you're someone who does think that way and you're watching this, please hold on. Don't tune out yet and hear me out, okay? I will do my best not to insult you. I'm not going to promise you anything, but I will do my best. But the thing is this, and at least hear this before you switch off to another podcast, and that's this. The evidence to support the things that I'm going to state in this episode are abundant. I mean, ridiculously abundant, to the point of absurdity that anyone like this would write drivel like this and expect it to be looked at as anything other than crazy BS. So the abundance of information out there to back up is there, and I'm going to show you a lot of that today. Because I don't want you to think that I'm just going to sit here and go, well, my opinion is that he's wrong, and his opinion is that I'm wrong. And so there we go. We've balanced it out. That's not the way I operate. So this guy starts off on the very first page. There's, 3 paragraphs or so. And it was making me think that maybe this was going to be some kind of balanced effort. But then you turn the page. And that's all it takes, is just to turn the page, because This then goes into this. I hate to use the word liberal because then it sets liberal versus conservative, Democrat versus Republican, and in my mind, I really I'm trying to avoid that type of labeling. Yes, it does tend to follow those lines, but I think it's way beyond simple labeling like Democratic or Republican or liberal versus conservative. I definitely don't consider myself conservative. I used to consider myself liberal. I was a liberal Democrat, and I think it could have been easily. I could have easily been classified as a liberal Democrat, 20 years ago, maybe even 15 years ago. But there have been changes that have been happening from that liberal Democratic perspective that have been pushing me further and further and further away from that. Not into the conservative camp, because I would not consider myself conservative from that perspective. But I'm definitely have abandoned that whole liberal Democrat label for myself a while ago, for sure. And I don't want to call myself Republican, but I'm certainly not calling myself Democrat. I am in that no man's land that I'm sure a lot of you find yourselves in now. After this last election, and even before this last election, there were many people that were finding themselves in limbo between the parties because there was too much divisiveness, and it was hard to put yourself into one category because of this divisiveness, right? So the COVID pandemic, or plandemic, as some people like to call it, right, was horrible in a lot of different ways, but it was also an eye-opener. It was an event that shifted the consciousness of many Americans, and I'll reframe it, many people in this world, to open their eyes and see the control, or at least attempt to control, that's there, and the lies, the volume of lies that were promulgated during this whole time period. So from that standpoint, yay, thank you for COVID, because it woke up a lot of people to the realities of the propaganda, the message that whoever it is we want to talk about as being in charge or wanting to control things has got this message. Things that we thought were conspiracy theory, we've now discovered not so much conspiracy theory, actually pretty much true. A lot of that stuff. And believe me, I had lots of people that I know who have whispered conspiracy theorist behind my back towards me. So I get it. So first thing I want to do is just give a kind of a glimpse, an overview of this guy's article, so you see what he was saying, what got me a little riled up, and why I wanted to go this direction. And then I'm going to essentially, by showing actual facts, actual science, shred this document to pieces, because the garbage that he's spewing is not something he can back up. So it was interesting. So he starts going in. He does what so many, and I'm going to use the word liberal. If you consider yourself a liberal, I'm not trying to lump everybody into this category, but I'm not sure how else to label it. Woke liberal, rephrase it and talk about a spectrum. You could be a liberal and you could be a woke liberal, okay, way over here. So, just like you could be a conservative and be a moderate conservative or something. I'm not sure how to categorize that. But there's this mindset that if the word Trump is in a sentence, then anything that's in that sentence is automatically bad or even evil. Okay, Hitler, right? Automatic. Now, I will back up again and say this. I am not going to defend Trump for most stuff. I'm not crazy about Trump as a person, as his personality. I don't like his personality. I don't like the way he speaks to people. I don't like the way he does his messaging. I think it could be done a lot better without offending people. Now that's my old liberal mindset saying that too, you know, but I like most of his policies. I certainly like him better than the other choices that we had in the election. We didn't have any choices in the election because Bobby Kennedy had to drop out because of all the attacks against him from the Democratic Party. So I went with Trump. I voted for Trump. Hey, it's out there. Okay. Because there's no way I was going to vote for Kamala Harris. I wasn't going to vote for the Biden policies. I wasn't going to vote for the woke liberal mindset that has been tearing our country apart for the past 4 years and started even before that. Wasn't going to do it. Does that mean I love Trump? No. Does it mean I'm a MAGA Trump person with a hat? No, not that either. I've got no problem with that. But I will tell you in the same breath that I don't care for Trump and a lot of the things he says. At the same time, I voted for him because I didn't vote for his personality. I voted for him because he was the better choice for president, and I think he's going to lead our country in the right direction. End of politics for that part of it. The point I'm making is that for a lot of people from that perspective, all they have to do is hear the word Trump and they go off the deep end. There's this, was it Trump derangement syndrome that people talk about, right? Someone hears the word Trump and they automatically just start going into this crazy mode. And they shut their ears off to anything at all that could be said that could defend Trump because they don't want to hear it. The problem with that, and this is with any topic, that is as soon as you turn your ears off like that and you don't hear the other message, then you're stuck in a mindset that could be totally wrong, and you're never going to get past that because you've dug yourself into the sand and you're just going to fight to the death there. And that's what people do with Trump. Excuse me, my nose is very itchy today. So that tends to occur in this article. So one of the first things I highlighted here, he said, if the forces of science and health are to stage a comeback. This is at the beginning of the article. If the forces of science and health are to stage a comeback, his meaning in this was that the anti-vaxxers and the COVID deniers were anti-science and anti-health. That's his meaning in this. So that right off the bat was one of the first sentences I read where I was like, okay, this guy is off the deep end. To think that that's an actual statement that could be made as any kind of factual statement that's going to hold up under any kind of examination, absolutely absurd. He also goes on to say this. He says, if every adult in the United States had received 2 doses of a COVID vaccine by early 2022, rather than just the 64% of adults who had, nearly 320,000 lives would have been saved. My first thought was, where the hell did you get that number? That's a very specific number. And where did you get the idea that that's anywhere close to truth? Because if you look at the information that's really out there in the science, the real science, the COVID vaccine has probably killed as many people as it may have helped. And the COVID vaccine didn't give good protection, which is why you had to go way past just 2 doses. People were on like 6 doses with all the boosters, crazy stuff. And people like even Fauci had been vaccinated and boosted a bunch of different times and still got COVID. I don't know what it was at this point, with 3 times, 4 times, even after that. So to sit here and make a statement that if everybody had gotten their vaccines, at least 2 doses, we would have saved 320,000 lives. Absolute insanity. He goes on, Trump instantly recognized the crisis as a threat to his chances for re-election. Once again, huge, massive assumption here. And once again, that whole Trump derangement thing. Trump must have done something wrong during 2020 to put people on this path, right? He goes on with that same kind of an idea by saying that vaccine rejection, so rejection of the COVID vaccine, became a badge of group loyalty to Trump. So the only reason people like myself or you who are watching who probably didn't take the COVID jab, the only reason you did that is because support for Trump. That's it. Not because you had a brain, not because you did your own investigation, not because you didn't trust a system that was lying and corrupt, not because you didn't trust the validity of an mRNA vaccine, which there's never been a successful mRNA vaccine prior to COVID, ever. And this was one that was bumped out in the fastest time ever for a vaccine. You're right. The only reason we denied it was because of Trump. Stupid. Just an absolute asinine statement. He goes on, lots of other stuff, talking about all sorts of stuff about the COVID pandemic. By disparaging public health methods and discrediting vaccines, the COVID-19 minimizers cost hundreds of thousands of people their lives. So I'm a murderer, is what he's saying. By keeping schools closed longer than absolutely necessary, the COVID maximizers, okay, the people that believed every single thing that was out there about COVID, hazarded the futures of young Americans. So he tries in this article at a couple of points to try and make it look like he's trying to balance the scales of what he's saying by saying the people who promoted COVID stuff may have done something wrong here, and the people who denied it did something wrong here. But overall, it's more like a 90-10 ratio in this article. 90% of everything that's bad or wrong or could have happened wrong or people died is all because of these deniers. Scientists did deliver vaccines to prevent the disease and treatments to recover from it. Scientists did deliver vaccines to prevent the disease and treatments to recover from it, okay? Economic policy did avert a global depression and did rapidly restore economic growth. What? Government assistance kept households afloat when the world shut down, and new remote work practices enabled new patterns of freedom and happiness after the pandemic ended. I don't know what world this guy lived in or lives in, but that sure as hell wasn't the world that I went through during the pandemic. And I can tell you from hundreds of conversations with hundreds of individuals that it wasn't their reality as well. And I can tell you that one of the reasons why Biden lost so, well, let me rephrase that, Kamala lost so dramatically, besides being a horribly ridiculous candidate to put in the position of running for president in the first place. The reason Trump won the popular vote and the electoral vote, the reason why Republicans are in control of everything right now is because of two things I'll say. Number one, because of this idea that he just espoused that somehow Biden made things better over his 4 years and that we were in some kind of a paradise economically. This unrealistic view of what happened over those 4 years is one of the reasons your team lost so dramatically. Okay. The average American is not feeling like things are getting better. The average American has been hurting for the past 4 years, not feeling like our economy is on the way up at all. And so these numbers that Biden threw out, blah, 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 that things are getting better, they would say that, and then they'd have an interview with people in the street, and they'd be saying, what? Because it was stupid. It was ridiculous. Okay. This idea that happiness and freedom after the pandemic ended. What freedom? Okay, we're going to get into that. So there's some craziness going on here with this guy's article. I really don't understand what this guy's thinking is. He goes on to say something like, in 2016, Trump inherited a strong and healthy economy to try and imply that any kind of success that happened in his 4 years was because he inherited a strong and vital economy. But I will guarantee you that this same fella here if you asked him why things look gloomy right now with Trump, that it's because of his actions in the past 2 months and has nothing to do with Biden. Biden made everything successful. So whatever we're feeling right now is all because of Trump and whatever he's done in less than 2 months. Once again, absurdity, absolute absurdity. You can't say one thing and say the other and think that they're equal. And then he goes on to say, in the pandemic, there were many errors. The partisan dogma of the COVID minimizers. Partisan dogma of the COVID minimizers. But the part that really gripped me was how he ended this article. So he ends this article with this paragraph. So this is the end of it. The wrong people have profited from the immediate aftermath. What he means by that is that Trump is now in power and the Republicans are in power. But if we remember the pandemic accurately, the future will belong to those who rose to the crisis when their country needed them. Oh my God. This guy is hilarious. So the wrong people have won, meaning that Trump and the Republicans are in power. But if we remember this whole pandemic accurately, which is what we're about to get into, that the future is going to belong to those who rose to the crisis. Talk about virtue signaling at its best. David Frum, you are a virtue signaler par none. So that was the article in the Atlantic. So I'm going to get rid of that there. I'd like to put a match to it. But we'll wait until later to do a little ritualistic burning of that. So let's talk about how incredibly misinformed this person is. Okay, let's talk about that. So for the rest of this episode here, we are going to dive a little bit deeper into the COVID pandemic. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into the realities that contradict this person's article. Okay. There is no time in one episode to cover all of this. I'm going to do a kind of overview of a lot of different points. Each of these points could easily be its own, 2-hour episode because the information is so voluminous when it comes to being able to show the facts about this. One of the things I'm going to show you right here looks like a textbook, right? Well, this is the Pfizer papers by Naomi Wolf and others. Okay. The Pfizer papers. I have yet to finish the whole thing. I have skimmed through it and have not yet finished the whole thing. It is, they talk about something being a page turner. It's not a page turner. It's a book of information. Okay. So it's a bunch of facts, lots of it technical facts, but it is a book of facts. The Pfizer papers were the papers that were released under court order, essentially, to release this information about their research and all that information. And Naomi Wolf and a team of her investigators dug into all that and tore it apart. And this is the result of that. And in that book, we talk about a mountain of research and information. This is a mountain of research and information. If I just open it up to one thing here and just open it up to page 185. Other adverse events included MERS, multiple organ dysfunction syndrome, herpes infections, and 96 deaths. 15 patients were under age 12, including 6 infants. This is talking about one little piece of research that was investigated. And so every page is like that. It is, I think, one of those reads that may not be the funnest thing to read. It's not the most uplifting, but if you really want to inform yourself of this type of information, that's one of those must reads that you have to go through. And like I said, this is all information that was released by Pfizer. This is their documents, not made up. It's not some conspiracy theorist or anti-vaxxer who decided to retwist words to make it fit their agenda. This is their information that was released from their research. So you've heard me talk about my book. It is still in the process of going through publishing. That's a slow process, let me tell you. The last chapter in the book, chapter 16, is point number 16. It's the SARS-CoV-2 agenda is the title of that. And in that chapter, what I talk about is that during the pandemic, the idea of being a conspiracy theorist was rampant. People on one side were calling the other side conspiracy theorists. Every time you opened your mouth about something, the virus came from a lab in China. You're a conspiracy theorist. The virus is really not that deadly, and the numbers of deaths are inflated. You're a conspiracy theorist. Anytime you said anything that went against the narrative, you were automatically labeled a conspiracy theorist by the media, the legacy media, the social media. Any journalist, for the most part, was doing that. You're probably your best friends, your family members, everybody was calling you a conspiracy theorist for saying these things. And hopefully you're up to date with the information now that proves you were right and they were wrong. Pretty much every single thing that was said that was labeled as a conspiracy theory has now been proven to be not conspiracy, to be fact. Okay. And that's across the board. So for those who still think that those things were conspiracy, I'm not really sure. It's that whole idea of living under a rock. I don't know where you've been, because even in the mainstream media, some of that has leaked out and it's in there. So the articles, the research articles, the information, it's abundant. Okay. And I'm going to end today's episode with a kind of a synopsis of all of that. But why don't we start off with one of the very first things? The very first things was basically how deadly COVID, SARS-CoV-2, okay, to be specific, is or was. Okay. When the pandemic first started, okay, and which we can call the beginning of 2020. Really, the first case was in 2019, but as far as everyone's concerned, the beginning of 2020 was when everything started. I can remember when I first started hearing about this, there's this deadly virus. The death rates are upwards of like 4%. Some people were even saying possibly 5 or 6%. Now, when you're talking numbers like that, now you think out of 100, 3 or 4% is not that much. That's huge. And so when I first heard the numbers that were being put out there in the media, it freaked me out. And I'm someone who tends to not freak out at first look at things. I heard those numbers and I was like, damn, we need to put masks on. We need to separate. We need to do all these things because that's crazy. But here's the thing. The first numbers that were being espoused in the media were case fatality rates. So let's give a brief definition here. You've got CFR, which is case fatality rate, versus IFR, which is, incidence fatality rate. Case fatality rate versus incidence fatality rate. Sometimes I hear it worded a little bit differently, but that's the two. Your case fatality rate is based on the confirmed deaths among the confirmed cases of a specific disease. So we have a confirmed number of cases of COVID, let's say 5,000, and we have a confirmed number of deaths, XYZ. Then we basically divide those numbers between each other. We come up with a percentage, okay? And that gives you your death rate. So when you're talking 4%, 5%, 6% dead, that was based on a case fatality rate. Now, case fatality rate is not the best way to go about analyzing something when it comes to the reality of its virulence. Your IFR, that incidence fatality rate, is the best way. Now, it's harder to establish typically, okay, because you typically have to estimate the asymptomatic or undiagnosed cases of the given virus. So looking at COVID again. So if you had you had 5,000 confirmed cases, that was 5,000 confirmed cases. How many cases actually were there, though, that weren't confirmed? How many people caught COVID and never went to a hospital, never went to a doctor, maybe even single people who stayed in their apartment or their home, got over the sickness, and never even told anybody. They thought it was a flu. Okay. How many people were asymptomatic who basically caught it and never had any symptomatology and just walked around as an asymptomatic person? That number is going to be far larger than that 5,000, far larger. But you have to estimate that. So when you estimate the IFR, now that changes the number that died who actually caught the disease, and it changes it drastically. And that is the real reality of the virulence of the disease. Now, I'm not trying to tell you that COVID was harmless, and I'm not trying to tell you that it's tragic that someone you know and love died. It's always tragic. So nothing I'm going to say here is trying to belittle the pain that you may have experienced from someone you know passing from COVID. I'm deeply sympathetic and empathetic to that situation. I get that, but that's not what we're trying to discuss here. Individual deaths and people who died, it's always tragic. You could have said the same thing for someone who died from the flu. You could have said the same thing from someone who died from anything else. So talking about it with COVID seems to be taboo, but we're going to break that taboo and we're going to talk about it anyway. Okay. Now, the most current, to my knowledge, okay, and it could have shifted over the last year or so, but the current information now shows that SARS-CoV-2 globally has an IFR, that incidence fatality rate, somewhere between 0.03 and 0.07%. Okay, so not even 1%. We're talking 0.03%. Not even 0.3%. Okay, right? 0.03% to 0.07%. That is the IFR, meaning that's how many people are actually dying per the amount of people catching it. Take that in for a second, okay? And think about that. Can COVID kill you? 100%. Yes, it can, okay? But the actual virulence of this virus is between 0.03 and 0.07%, okay? Now, that's almost exactly the same as it is for the seasonal flu. Very, very close, okay? Now, their transmissibility is different. I'm not going to get into the details of that. COVID is more transmissible than the flu, but their death rate, their virulence is about the same, 0.03 to 0.07%, okay? And so I think I have, let me see if I have that here. Yeah, I think I have it right here. Yep, here we go. So this, I told you I would show you this stuff. So this is, so this is from the Journal of Environmental Research, age stratified infection fatality rate. That's that IFR of COVID-19 in the non-elderly population. And so what we are looking here, down here in the abstract, meta-regression analysis also suggests global IFR of 0.03% and 0.07% respectively in these age groups. And so when we're talking about, once again, the death tolls, okay, how many people actually die from COVID. And so very, very, very low numbers, okay, very low numbers. So I don't throw these numbers out there, once again, to belittle the pain that you may have felt if someone you know passed away from COVID. I'm sorry for your loss. What I'm trying to show is that the fear of COVID, which was beaten into the public during the past 4 to 5 years, it's still now. There are still people walking around with masks on, thinking they have to cover up their face with something to protect themselves from getting sick from COVID. You know, now some of these people may have autoimmune illness and they're doing this because of that. I'll guarantee you 99% of them don't have that and they're still wearing the masks. Many of these people are walking around with a mask like this with their nose exposed. They're in the car by themselves with a mask on. The craziness, that is from the fear that they drove into people during the pandemic. They terrified a percentage of the population that will never take the mask off now. They will never be without the mask. I see people at the Whole Foods store. You've got your 20-year-olds working at Whole Foods store wearing a mask, 20-year-olds. When it comes to the IFR, that 0.03%, we're talking about their population, okay? In the 20s, people in the 20s, not even 0.5% is dying from this disease from your population. We're talking 0.03%, yet you're wearing a mask to protect yourself from something that the chances of it killing you, you have a better chance of getting struck by lightning. You got a better chance of getting eaten by a shark. I mean, I don't know the specifics, but I'm just saying. And so the fear is tragic, because these are people that are never going to be the same. They're never going to be the same. They are going to always be scared, right? You know, from now on. Now, other things. So let's even go a little bit deeper with that. So when we talk about that IFR is, once again, how many people die per amount of people that actually catch COVID, okay? Incredibly low. And that number, okay, there's two other things that you really need to take into consideration when thinking about that number. Number one, when it comes to people dying of COVID, the vast majority of people who died from COVID had underlying chronic illnesses that made them far more likely to catch COVID and to die from COVID, okay? 75% or more of COVID deaths occurred in people who had at least 4 comorbidities. Comorbidities being some other type of disease or condition that weakened their immune system that allowed them to die from COVID. 75% or more died with 4 or more comorbidities. Now, if you're someone who is over the age of 65, 70 years old, and you have at least 4 comorbidities, then yeah, you may have a little bit more, legitimacy for being scared of COVID, okay? But I would tell you that same thing applies to the flu, okay? And did you walk around scared of the flu before? Did you wear a mask when COVID didn't exist and it was the flu? No, none of us did. None of us walked around scared of the flu. None of us wore a mask. None of us partitioned ourselves away 6 feet away, which was one of the most ridiculous things. We never did those things, okay? Because we realized that, yes, somewhere in the back recesses of our mind, we thought, yes, people do die from flu, but I'm not going to die from flu. The chances are so remote. But suddenly with COVID, it was totally different. And the biggest difference, the main difference, was not a matter of COVID versus the flu per se. That yes, there are differences, the transmissibility, like I said, but the big difference was the media. The big difference was the amount of propaganda and fear that was instilled in everyone over COVID. Now, yes, it was a new thing. I get that. Yes, mistakes can be made. And this guy points some of that stuff out in his article, that that when something is new, mistakes are going to get made. We'll touch that too. But the other thing that needs to be considered with that IFR is that IFR is using the public records to determine the caseload, at least in part, because they have to start with a base caseload and then extrapolate out from that to estimate. Okay, so they're looking at the base level of confirmed cases. But the problem with that is that we had, and I'm actually scrolling down through my chapter in my book because I wanted to find something here. We had a lot of deaths being reported to be said that they were COVID, okay, that were not COVID. Okay, and this is not conspiracy theory. I remember having a conversation during COVID, during the pandemic, with a friend, okay, who was telling me that I was full of it, that I was buying into a conspiracy, that I was buying into misinformation when I talked about things like that. But the problem is that that's not true. uh, even major uh, media outlets were writing articles regarding this type of thing. So you had, where is it? Right here. Here we go. Los Angeles County public health officials said their tally of COVID-19 deaths includes any person who died from a heart attack, stroke, or another ailment if they had tested positive for the coronavirus within the last 90 days. So it didn't matter if you had tested positive 90 days ago, if you died of a heart attack, if you died of a stroke, or any other ailment. If they know that you had tested positive for COVID, that's what went into your death certificate. This same article goes on. In Oregon, state public health officials said that they included anyone who had tested positive within 60 days of death, including those who died from accidents such as automobile wrecks. This was an actual article in the paper talking about interviews with the people who were doing these types of things. And there was lots of that. So if you consider that type of thing being in the public record, that falsifies deaths, okay? That falsifies deaths. That then brings the IFR even lower. So as low as the IFR is, the reality is that it is most likely lower than that based on these types of falsehoods. And let me tell you, the amount of articles that I found with that type of information on it, it just goes on and on. I'm not going to show you all of those because it's just too much to even show you with that. But I could if I would. So that just goes on forever. But I want to move on to another point. Masks. We'll talk about masks. So Mr. Virtue Signaler, okay, who says that those who rose to the occasion and followed all the rules that the government was telling us to do, that they were the ones that held the line, and that virtue signaling that he wanted to put out there. So this guy was a mask wearer. He was a 6 feet distance person. He got his vaccines. I'm sure he did all the right things because, of course, everybody should have done that like he did. The interesting thing about masks, if you do a deep dive into mask research, which I did for my book, you will find, and I'm not going to know the exact number, let's say hundreds of individual research articles, at the very least, dozens of individual research articles. And for the most part, with very few exceptions, the vast majority of research prior to COVID did not validify the efficacy of wearing masks to protect yourself from something like the virus, the COVID virus. The vast majority of research, almost to the letter, did not back up that information. Okay. During the pandemic, early on, the Surgeon General Jerome Adams actually said that masks were not effective in preventing the general public from catching coronavirus. Actually said that. And even Dr. Fauci, everyone's seen the famous videos of him saying, don't wear masks, don't wear masks, don't wear masks, don't wear masks. Yes, wear masks, switching and flipping. And the information that they flipped on, the reason that they flipped on this came out later. The reason that they flipped on that information about the masks is because they felt it was better than nothing. And they felt that if they could give the public an actionable step, something that they could actually do to protect themselves, that it would go a long ways to leveling people out and making them feel, like that was something good. I was trying to find another article that I found here. This was the World Health Organization during COVID. I don't remember when this came out. This is a quote from Dr. Mike Ryan, the executive director of the World Health Organization emergency programs, at a media briefing in Switzerland, made this comment. He said, there is no specific evidence to suggest that the wearing of masks by the mass population has any potential benefit. In fact, there's some evidence to suggest the opposite in the misuse of wearing a mask properly or fitting it properly. I don't know how many people here, you have to think about this, during the pandemic, did you switch your mask out daily? I guarantee you most people did not. Number one, it's costly. Number two, in your mind, it's probably wasteful. Okay. I know people, and I still see them driving around today. I saw a guy yesterday. I pointed it out to my wife as we were driving. This guy, from hanging from his rearview mirror, probably had 15, easily a dozen masks hanging from his rearview mirror, like some kind of trophy. These masks that are sitting there are now getting exposed to the air flying through that car. They're getting dirty. They're trapping germs within the mask before you even put it onto your face. That is not the proper usage of a mask. I remember during the pandemic seeing people's masks walking around in Kroger and seeing their masks and thinking, my God, that mask looks filthy. That they must have been wearing this exact same mask over and over and over again for months. Once again, zero protection in that scenario. In fact, you're breathing in now bacteria that's building up in that mask, and that can create lung infections. And so the wearing of the masks had little to very little to no benefit whatsoever. The effectiveness of masks, like I said, the ineffectiveness of masks, I should say, was shown in research over and over and over again, long before COVID ever came along. And I wanted to show you one thing here. Here it is right here. Let me pull this up. So I've got to put the research article up here. I got to pull it out of my references here. So this right here. So the MMWR is the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. As it states, this is something that comes out weekly from the CDC. And they've been doing these for decades and decades. And in this edition right here, they had, and I'll see if I can find it here. I've got the actual quote, but I'm not sure which page it was on. Is that it there? That is not it. But in this MMWR, they state very clearly, I've got this saved somewhere else where I actually have it highlighted, but I did not. Oh, here it is right here. This is it, because delay or avoidance. No, that's not it. Okay. Should have been better prepared for this, right? But what you're going to see here, just trying to show it to you here. All right, well, I don't want to spend all day trying to find this. So it's in here. You can look it up yourself. I at least showed you where to find it. And I'm going through this so fast, I'm going to miss it. Yeah, I'm going to miss it. So it's in there, but what's in there is this, and that is that in that MMWR, they talk about masks saving lives, which is one of the things his virtue signaling is trying to imply. But the CDC did their own study, and what they found was 85% of those who were confirmed as COVID-19 positive cases wore masks either often or always, according to their study. The CDC's own study in that MMWR that I just showed you, that was volume 69, issue 36. It's in there somewhere. You can look it up yourself. 85% of those who were confirmed as COVID-19 positive cases wore masks either often or always. So if you want enough proof, I could show you dozens of research papers that talk about the inefficiency and ineffectiveness of wearing masks, and even some research that showed lung infections, increases in asthma, problems with cardiorespiratory issues with wearing masks, particles of masks getting trapped in lungs, all of those types of things. But just this one piece here from the CDC, the people that were trying to tell us that we should be wearing masks, their own research showed 85% of those getting positive 19 cases were wearing the masks. Okay, so you talk about inefficiency and ineffectiveness. So when I see people still wearing masks to this day, especially people who are in their 20s, in their teens, wearing masks, or I see parents walking around a grocery store with their toddlers and their infants still to this day wearing masks, it is beyond me. And it is that fear. It's that fear that was driven into the heart of so many people, and they just can't seem to get over it. The SARS-CoV-2 being released from a lab in China. Oh my God, that was probably the biggest conspiracy theorist of all, right? If you said that, you were a nut job. So I will admit that when the first time I heard that this was a possibility was probably within a month of finding out about COVID, maybe even less. I mean, it was very rapid that this became a reality. James Lyons Weiler, great guy. If you're not following him on Twitter or his Substack, excellent. You should be doing that. He puts out some great information. Very smart guy. He was one of the first people to talk about the idea that this was coming from a lab in China. Well, at least one of the first people that I heard of. And of course, anybody who ever said that was a nut job. Okay. And, I think James Lyons Weiler, he released something in February of 2020. Yeah, that would have been right there at the very beginning. And talking about genomic sequencing as pointing towards a lab origin. Even when Trump mentioned that, of course, Trump mentioned it, so it has to be wrong. It's crazy. I shied away from all of that. For one, because for me, it was kind of irrelevant. It wasn't something that was worth me getting bashed and trying to defend when there wasn't enough evidence in the first place. So I shied away from that there at the beginning. I looked at other things. I looked at the virulence issue, and I talked about that. I looked at the mask issue. I talked about that. These were all things that I brought up with patients in our office, with students of mine, and tried to educate people around me. But I tried to stay away from that. But this was something that was so contentious, and anybody who mentioned it was the crazy conspiracist. So it turns out, though, that now the FBI and other intelligence agencies have looked into it, and they're saying, okay, in fact, I've got a quote here somewhere. There it is. This is from the Wall Street Journal. They wrote in one of their articles, FBI director says COVID pandemic likely caused by Chinese lab leak. Now, this was from Wall Street Journal, who I guarantee you, if I were to look back at their records during 2020, were probably just as guilty as everybody else, saying that anybody who was saying it was from a lab is probably a nut job. They were probably just as guilty as anybody else. But credit to them making an article here. The article goes on to quote the FBI director as saying, the FBI has for quite some time now assessed that the origins of the pandemic are most likely a potential lab incident in Wuhan. So, once again, not conspiracy, right? Not conspiracy at all. The other thing, and this guy belittles hydroxychloroquine in there, and Never mentions ivermectin, which is interesting, but he bastardizes HCQ. Here's the thing. People who were not getting all of their information about this stuff from the media and believing it, those of us who were actually doing our own research and backing information up, were the ones that you're calling COVID deniers. I'm not denying that COVID or SARS-CoV-2 existed. I know there's people that do say that. I'm not denying that. I will tell you that's fine. It existed, whatever. SARS-CoV-2, right? I'm not saying that I even care whether it came from the lab, whatever. Okay. I'm not going to get into that part of the conspiracy. But when you tell me the virulence and I look at it and it's wrong, when you tell me that there's no effective treatments that can be done for this virus, that's IFR is almost identical to the flu, even though it's more transmissible. You got me going here. When you basically, with every single piece of media, tell me that everything I'm saying is misinformation when I can prove it to you that it's not, then no, I'm not going to listen to anything you're saying. I'm not going to do what you're telling me to do. I'm not going to believe what you're telling me to believe, because I've already seen the truth and you're telling me that it's misinformation when I know for a fact that it's not. Who am I supposed to believe? You or me and my eyes? I believe my eyes. Okay. And I believe my brain, and my brain with my eyes in conjunction are telling me that this is wrong. So when you call us deniers, I would tell you that most of the people that are denying these separate issues during COVID, no, they're intelligent people. They're intelligent people who are using their brain to look at information as opposed to just being sheep and following along with the rest of the sheep off the cliff because someone told them that's what they're supposed to do. It's not the way I live my life. And so, yeah, no, it doesn't work that way. When we talk about effective treatments, this was one of probably the most corrupt, evil, nasty things that happened during COVID. There was, and now I'm going to totally forget the name of it. EUA, Emergency Use Authorization. So early on, emergency use authorization was enacted. Now, let me say, we talked about Trump earlier. Trump is just as guilty as Biden with a lot of this because it started under Trump. Now, Trump has since talked about this in different interviews, saying that he got lots of bad information. He followed it. He shouldn't have. He hasn't come out to really own up or deny or accept some of his things that he went wrong beyond that. But yes, it started with Trump, and it escalated with Biden. And the part with Biden that is the problem, or with the Democratic Party that was in control for 4 years during this process, at least 3 years, 4 years for sure, was the amount of censorship that occurred via the Democratic Party through Facebook, through YouTube, through Twitter before it became X, through any of the social media platforms, and all of the legacy media, TV, newspaper, even radio. There is so much evidence now to show the government's influence on what was being done. Mark Zuckerberg has testified that he was forced to do the things that they did. He didn't have to do it, but he went along with it. So culpability on his part as well. YouTube's engines, to point out and deny things, all this stuff. Elon Musk, after purchasing Twitter and turning it into X, released all the papers, the documents, to show very clearly the censorship that was occurring. When we look at the legacy media, I tried to find this and I couldn't find it. I know that the Highwire has this clip somewhere in their data stream. But there was a really famous clip that went around a few years ago. And what it showed was a clip of two news journalists on TV telling some kind of story, pumping up all the COVID protocol type stuff. This is what you should do under COVID and the vaccines and everything. And then it showed side by side two totally separate news journalists repeating the exact same words. And then it split again. It was kind of like that old shampoo commercial, right? Where the person splits and it says, and so on and so on and so on. And this clip kept dividing and showing you hundreds of individual television newscasters standing and giving the exact same speech, word for word. And none of them ever say that we are reading off the prompter because this is what the government's telling us to say. They're just all reading the exact same speech because the government was telling them to do so. This is what you have to say. That's probably one of the biggest problems that I think most Americans had. And those people who don't have a problem with that, you're the ones who need to look in the mirror and say, who is really anti-American? Americans should have freedom of speech. They should be able to have open communication and conversation. And one of the worst things to happen in COVID, period, was the censorship. And that is something that drove so many Americans over the edge. And so if you weren't sticking up for freedom of speech, if you were one of the ones supporting this idea of shutting down misinformation, just because my information doesn't agree with everything you say, doesn't necessarily make it misinformation. And when I can show you information that backs up my information from research, it's definitely not misinformation. So then to take away accounts, to banish people from their social media, to fire medical doctors and scientists because their information goes against what the government's information is trying to prove, that's a problem. So this EUA that I was about to start talking about, emergency use authorization, was enacted. If you don't understand what the EUA guidelines were or what that was, under the EUA, it allowed the government to start working on these vaccines at this accelerated rate, okay? And also gave them the ability to then be able to force this on everybody. It also allowed the pharmaceutical companies that were making these products, it gave them protection, just like the rest of the vaccine schedule. So they get protected from their corrupt, evil, and yes, evil is accurate in this scenario. This allowed them to get carte blanche denial of any kind of problems, and it allowed the government to force this down everybody's throats. But here's the thing, with the EUA, the rules are very, very clear. And it indicates that there can be no adequate, approved, and available alternatives. As long as there are no, like I said, adequate, approved, available alternatives, then they can push the vaccines. So there was a huge financial and control incentive to publicly insult and deny any type of treatment that came out, to shut down medical doctors who were talking about treatments. And so if you're a medical doctor and you're saying, well, wait a minute, we've been getting good success with ivermectin, and hydroxychloroquine, pretty good results, not as good as ivermectin, but yeah, and we've got, all these other types of things that we're trying, and they are very cheap and they're effective. Bunesicide, I'm totally messing up the word, is another one, which was an inhalant. But these treatments were being used successfully by many doctors. Ivermectin, the one that got talked about as a horse dewormer. Ivermectin, if you look it up, the person who discovered ivermectin, created that, won a Nobel Prize. His face is in a statue I think in Washington or somewhere. I mean, ivermectin was touted as one of the safest drugs to ever be created. It has been used for decades. And yes, it wasn't used for COVID-19. Guess what? We have so many different medications right now, currently, that are being used for purposes that weren't what they were created for. To badmouth ivermectin for doing the same thing was a double standard that had an evil intent. The evil intent is this: ivermectin was cheap, hydroxychloroquine, cheap. The pharmaceutical companies could not make any money off of those. And when I say any money, I mean not sufficient to their needs. Okay. Bunesicide, and I'm butchering the name, any of these types of treatments, vitamin D for that matter, they're not going to make any money off of that. The EUA was their golden ticket to make money and have the control and have it in the lineup now. You know, they're trying to push this on the kids, the babies now, as part of the vaccine schedule. Okay. There's so much money involved in that. And if you don't think money talks, if you don't think money controls what's happening, where the hell have you been? What rock have you been living under? Because that's just insanity to think that. The EUA was the ticket to this. It was the key. And that was the primary reason why ivermectin and all of these other treatments were bastardized the way that they were. If you talk to any of the main doctors who were using these treatments and still are using these treatments to help people with coronavirus, you will see the success that was being created. Now, another drug came up during this same time period, and that was remdesivir. Remdesivir. I hate the names they give drugs. They're so ridiculous. Remdesivir. Okay. The funny thing is that if you talk to some of the nurses in the wards where they were using remdesivir, they had another nickname for that drug, and that was run, death is near. Instead of remdesivir, it was run, death is near. Because they realized that there were a lot of people dying off remdesivir. It was not creating the rescue for people with COVID that they were being promised. And once again, remdesivir, brand new experimental drug, pushed through because Fauci wanted it up there, and it was a moneymaker. I don't remember the amount per dosage, but it was a crazy thing. It was like $5,000 per dose or something like that. It was absolutely insane. And ivermectin had a much better track record than remdesivir. So this is another one of those things. Once again, the science is out there. I'm speeding up a little bit just because we're over an hour now in this, and I want to just say this next big thing here. Let me pull it up here. So much stuff we could talk about here. Like I said, it just goes on and on and on. The amount of craziness, the amount of lies that have been promulgated through COVID is insanity. I lost friends during COVID. I have talked to a lot of people who said they lost friends during COVID that were so stuck on certain ideas, and the conversations got heated, and you know, some of that's on me. I was, I'm sure, a hothead with some of this stuff myself because I knew the facts, and these people were telling me that I was wrong, and they were believing the media, and I don't understand how anybody could do that. It divided a lot of people, family members, friends, and it's unfortunate. Any of my friends out there who watch this, I doubt they are. I'm sorry for my part of that. I'm sorry for me being a hothead. The problem is the information is out there. It's out there in volumes. Okay. And here is my final part to that, my nail in the coffin, if you will. And I'm going to pull this up here. Now, this is not the actual document. This is from, this is an addendum added to my book, but I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. Whoop, I just pressed the wrong button, of course. Here we go. There it is. All right. You know, so funny. I got so wrapped up in talking, which I do so much. If I had someone working here who could flash stuff in while I'm talking, that'd be great, but I don't. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this one up right here. If I can get this thing to go away from there it goes. This was an article from the U.S. News, White House working with social media giants to silence anti-vaxxers. This was from 2021. And this was, once again, talking about that censorship. So like I said, lots of articles, lots of things out there, so that was just another one of those. But this is what I wanted to show you. Now, as I said, this was an addendum to my last chapter. On December 2nd, 2024, the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic, a subcommittee of the House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Accountability, released its final report after nearly 2 years of investigation. The committee included 9 Republicans and 7 Democrats. This document is over 500 pages of detailed information on many of the points that I talked about in this chapter. So the Select Subcommittee on Coronavirus Pandemic, once again, a bipartisan, for the most part, 9 and 7, bipartisan group of Republicans and Democrats, which looked at these issues, some of the ones that I just talked about, for 2 years of investigation, looking at the facts, looking at the research, looking at all the stuff that was released from different social media, from all the different investigative meetings that they had, bringing people to sit before them and ask them questions. They had Fauci come in and sit down, and he, of course, lied like crazy to them. But of course, he's pardoned now. Thank you, Biden, for protecting him. He lied in front of this committee repetitively. But lots of doctors, lots of scientists, lots of administrators were all brought forth, and lots of stuff was revealed. So in the bullet points here in bold are the main points that they came up with. Like I said, this is over 500 pages, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but we can quickly look through some of this. So these were the points that they discovered with their 2 years of investigation. So instead of believing me, instead of believing the conspiracy theorists, you can believe this investigative process here. Number 1 here, SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, likely emerged because of a laboratory or research-related accident. 4 years after the onset of the worst pandemic in 100 years, the weight of the evidence increasingly supports the lab leak hypothesis. Once again, not conspiracy. So their investigation, not conclusive, but still weights heavily towards that theory. We may never know for sure. Okay, but it sure is more likely that direction than other. The proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2, which was another theory about where it came from, was prompted by Dr. Anthony Fauci to disprove the lab leak theory. In other words, Fauci lied. Fauci put out information and encouraged other scientists and people to support this information to go against the lab theory. Third one here, there was no quantitative scientific support for 6 feet of social distancing. Really? You think? That was the stupidest thing that came out during COVID, was this whole 6 feet thing. If you ever have the chance to look up science regarding how far a sneeze or cough spreads, there's tons of research that shows, even videos where you have someone sneeze and you look at the cloud. Oh my God, the cloud goes out as this wave, and it can go sometimes 25 feet. And so 6 feet, when most of the research was saying anywhere between 15 to 25 feet, it was absurd. It was, once again, one of those things that was put out there to make people feel safe, even though it really was based on nothing at all. And you wonder why there were people who didn't want to do this, who didn't want to follow that, because we had a brain, because we looked at this stuff and said, that's just fucking stupid. Why am I going to stand on this dot 6 feet away from you? Okay, if the mask is supposed to work, then why am I 6 feet away from you? Right? Ridiculousness, absolute ridiculousness. Okay, I'm going to move past some of the information I put in there. masks and mask mandates were ineffective at controlling the spread of COVID-19. A systematic review carried out by Cochrane Collaboration, one of the most highly regarded methodologies in evidence-based healthcare, found that the pooled randomized controlled trials that they analyzed did not show a clear reduction in respiratory viral infection with the use of medical surgical masks. Boom! Public health officials flip-flopping on the efficacy and use of face masks without full scientific transparency caused mistrust in public health establishments. The Biden administration exceeded its authority by mandating masks. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention relied on flawed studies to support the issuance of mask mandates. In issuing guidances that mandated the use of masks across the country, the CDC publicly relied on several different studies to justify the actions. The CDC provided a list of approximately 15 studies that demonstrated wearing masks reduced new infections. Yet all of the 15 provided studies are observational studies that were conducted after COVID-19 began, and importantly, none of them were random controlled trials. Once again, if you look at the research that was done prior to COVID, it did not support wearing masks. The stuff that they're using to support that was created in a rush job to show that they had support. This is how it works with science sometimes. You can buy and pay for the science to say exactly what you want it to say. Forcibly masking young children ages 2 and older caused more harm than good. No doubt with that whatsoever. So if you're a parent and you're still out there masking your child, read this, because your child's health, not only physically but also mentally, is at stake here. You're teaching your child to be fearful of their environment, not to have respect and trust in their body's ability to be healthy. Your body has the ability to be healthy. Build up that health by good food. Build that up health by exercise and good mindset, and not destroy it by wearing a mask all the time. Enduring COVID-19 lockdowns unnecessarily harmed the U.S. economy, damaged America's mental health, disrupted the development of American children and young adults, unnecessarily had severe consequences for Americans' physical health. This was all stuff from the lockdowns. Public health officials incorrectly characterized the lab leak theory as a conspiracy theory. Absolutely. Biden administration employed democratic and likely unconstitutional methods to fight what it deemed to be misinformation. This is what I was talking about with, once again, social media, etc. The judiciary the judiciary report found that major technology companies, Meta, Facebook, Alphabet, don't even know who the hell that is, Amazon, changed their content moderation policies in response to pressure from the Biden White House. Thankfully, that stuff has changed now, or at least is changing. I know I've seen changes on Facebook. I know I've seen changes on YouTube. Okay, so YouTube, Meta, thank you. I'm glad that you're reversing those policies. You should have never gone there in the first place. Shame on you for doing that, but thank you for at least switching it back. Thank God for Elon Musk and the purchase of Twitter, one of the bastions of free speech left on this planet. Okay, so those who want to badmouth Elon Musk, shame on you. Okay, Elon Musk has his issues. He's not a perfect person. Twitter is a great place. Some of the stuff there is crap. There's lots of negative stuff, but I'll tell you something. There's also lots of factual information floating on Twitter. You just got to use your brain once again, and you got to be able to decipher what's real from not real. The Biden administration employed undemocratic and likely unconstitutional methods to fight what it deemed to be misinformation. I just read that. Sorry about that. The Biden administration and many public health officials exaggerated the power of the COVID-19 vaccines. Boom. Once again, right there. Okay. On more than one occasion, President Biden himself overstated the vaccine's ability to prevent infection and transmission. These false statements likely contributed to Americans' confusion about COVID-19 vaccines and reduced overall vaccine confidence. It goes on over and over again to talk about this type of thing. the amount of information that was given out there. It even quotes here, Dr. Walensky from the CDC stated, vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick, and that it's not just in the clinical trials, but it's also in the real world data. A lie. Okay, an absolute lie. So that's interesting thing. Goes on. I won't read all of this, but I want to show you a few more points here. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration and other public health officials falsely implied that ivermectin was only for horses and cows. Okay. Let's skip some of the stuff. COVID-19 vaccine mandates caused massive collateral damage and were very likely counterproductive. Vaccine mandates were not supported by science. Vaccine mandates hampered U.S. military readiness. Long-term school closures were not supported by available science and evidence. It goes on. And this is not even all the bullet points. These are the ones that I pulled out to try and prove some points. But the reality is that this document, once again, 2 years of investigation by a bipartisan committee, came up with this information, proving, backing up the stuff that I'm saying now and the stuff that was being called conspiracy theory. Okay. So the bottom line is this guy's a moron. Okay. Okay. Moron. The stuff you're putting in your magazine should be double checked, even if it's an opinion piece. Okay. Because this guy's opinion, he's a moron. Okay. You're talking about the people who followed the line, who went with everything that the administration told us to do, who blindly followed rules that were hurting businesses. How many thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of small businesses closed in the past 4 or 5 years? I'll guarantee you the percentage is far higher than what it would normally be. I can tell you just from being in Cincinnati, Ohio, the number of restaurants and small businesses that have closed in the past 4 years is staggering. Now, do other new businesses come in and replace those? Sure they do. That's just the way things work. But that doesn't make it any less sad and any less tragic for all those businesses that had to close because of all of the mandates, because of all those things. I can tell you that my business took a strong hit. Our office took a strong hit through COVID. And we weren't even, wearing masks in the office. And we had people that didn't want to come in the office because we weren't wearing masks, but I wasn't going to follow those rules. Those rules were pulled out of someone's butt with no scientific recourse with that. So the people who write this stuff are living in a fantasy world. They're not looking at the actual science. Science is not static. I've said this before. I'll say it a million times. Science is not static. Science is not proven. Okay. They like to say that with vaccine stuff all the time. The science is proven. The science proves that vaccines don't cause autism. Well, what happens if science comes out that disproves that? Do you now just ignore that because the science that you're talking about proved that it wasn't? So this science has to be wrong. That's not the way science works. And anybody with any type of intelligence knows that. And so when the government tries to force feed you, this is what you have to do, and this is the reality, you can either go, oh, okay, or you can actually go, something doesn't feel right about that. Something doesn't sound right about that. I'm going to do my own investigation. And when you do that and you realize, now, wait a minute, you said this, but I'm seeing this. There's something wrong here. Now, do you just continue following along because they said this is what you do? Not in my world. So this guy and me, and maybe many of you, we live in separate worlds, obviously. When it comes to towing the line, that's never been my forte. If the line that's being towed is something that really needs to be done and it makes sense and there's evidence to show that it needs to be done, and I can follow that in a way that fits my belief systems and my brain, then yeah, I'm going to support that. COVID was a bad example of that. There was certainly a lot of examples of really bad stuff. So I'm going to start wrapping it up here. This has been a little bit longer than normal. Like I said, this information really, we could have gone on for a long time with these, and maybe we could take some of these and dissect them. Still love to hear from you. Let me know what you think of the program. Let me know what you think of this episode. If you got things to say, shoot me an email on there's an email list that you can sign up for. You can send me information and ask me questions. I would love to hear that. I hope once again that you found this educational, you found this informative, and hopefully my yapping is somewhat entertaining for you as well. Until next episode, we'll see you on the flip side. Bye-bye.